Hey everybody, what's up? It's your girl Toyzilla, and we're back for another episode of Toyzilla Streams Book Club. Alright, so we are on the second book of the Looking Glass Wars series. This book is called Seeing Red, and we're going to be reading chapters 5 and 6 today. Now, if you haven't read any of the chapters before, or of the previous book, they are on our YouTube channel. So just search for Toyzilla and look for that bear bot symbol. But one more thing I would like to just notate. Nobody's been asking about how they can send in no artwork or nothing. My feelings ain't hurt. But, that's just something to keep out there. If, you feel like you reading along with the book and you get like this really pretty image inside of your head and you draw it, you want to send it in, I would love to see it. And again, once I get requests to start sending in artwork, then I will let y'all know where y'all can send it in. But for now, I would just like to know that you guys are drawing and being creative. That makes me happy. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right now. Chapter 5. Hart Palace's inaugural gala had drawn to a close and the verdict was unanimous. The event had been a success, a sparkling gemstone in the crown of a queen still new to the complexities of party planning. Alice herself, however, was not pleased, too prickled by her meeting with King Arch to have enjoyed the festivities as thoroughly as her guests. Why did he have to mention my father? Indeed, she had never heard her father mention him. But then, why would Nolan have troubled a 7-year-old with matters of state involving an unlikable neighbor king? The sudden loss of her father was like living with a wound that would never heal, yet her memories of him were fading more and more every day. She'd been so young when she last saw him. In person, that is, because she had seen him twice since his death. Once in the Looking Glass Maze, and once in a glass at Mount Isolation's observation dome shortly after Red's defeat. But it wasn't only on Nolan's account that she was agitated. She had recently realized that any mention of a father could She had recently realized that any mention of a father caused her to think not only of him, but also of her other father, the one from her 13 years on Earth, Reverend Liddell of Christ Church College, Oxford University. Her memories of the Liddells were so much more vivid than anything she remembered of Nolan and Genevieve. But then, she had spent more time with the Liddells than she had with the king and queen whose blood throbbed in her veins. More than half my life. Alone in one of the palace's 7 staterooms, Alice tried to recollect time spent with her beloved parents, but she was unable to concentrate. In her imagination's eye, she watched the walrus butler supervise the sweeping and hosing of garden paths, the spritzing of sunflowers that had sung their voices ragged, the distribution of leftover Wonder Crumpets, Tarty Tarts, and other treats throughout the capital city. She gazed at these things, thinking not of her mother or father, nor of the Liddells, her loving adopted parents. She thought of Bibwit. Why didn't he tell me Morgavia is stockpiling weapons, or of Unterland's troubles with the Ganmead province? She had felt like an idiot lying to King Arch, and feared her ignorance of these matters had showed on her face. Bibwit's keeping intelligence from her. He wasn't up to anything diabolical, she knew. Only trying to prevent her from being overwhelmed by the responsibilities that fell to her as queen. The politicking within the queendom was enough to deal with without being burdened by inter-realm squabbles, but from now on, Bibwit must inform me of everything, every scrap of intelligence, no matter how small or apparently meaningless. Her imagination's eye fell on what had once been the 5 spires of Red construction site. The monstrous edifice had been torn down between its completion, its molten crystal recycled into the urban renewal projects of the neighborhoods most blighted by Red's tyranny. The grime and soot of Wondertropolis had been scraped off a layer at a time until the once radiant surfaces emerged and could be buffed to a sheen. Spangles of luminescent blues again mingled with vibrant reds and dusky golds on office towers. Spires of sunburst hues rose gleaming and incandescent above the rooftops of various government buildings and hotels. The city's landscape designers had removed all weeds and dead vegetation from the curbside gardens, replanting the same assortment of amaryllis, daisies, and aromatic, blossoming shrubs that had thrived before Red had sprayed them with naturecide. What if Arch is right? What if the entire world should be under the command of a single, absolute ruler, and the only way to establish a lasting peace among nations is to make them one nation? Because there were limits to what she could accomplish with a gift, though who had set these limits? Even Bibwit couldn't say. Imagination wise, she was still learning what she could and couldn't do, and probably will be forever. Alice's imaginative eye focused on the new urban resort, Wandronia Grounds, formerly known as Red's Hotel and Casino. Wandronia offered families a vacation destination without their having to leave the city. For adults, there were spa treatments, massages, elegant restaurants, nature hikes through indoor parks so vast and lush you never would have known you were indoors. For children, there were smooth quartz water slides, treasure hunts, and total MX gameplay where boys and girls could inhabit the persona of Hatter, Madigan, and Let me reread that. For children, there were smooth quartz water slides, treasure hunts, and total MX gameplay, where boys and girls could inhabit the persona of Hatter Madigan and perform an impressive repertoire of his acrobatic blade spinning maneuvers. Think of mother and father. By her imagination's eye, as if independent of her, skipped over Wondertropolis's holographic billboards, which in Red's time had announced nothing but crackdowns on suspected Allisons and white imagination practitioners, punishments of avowed dissenters, and incentives for turning in a neighbor or relative as a traitor to the government. These same billboards now streamed the latest traffic reports, aired advertisements for white imagination starter kits and safaris in outer wildebeestia. Gone from the streets were Red's redisms that had emanated from overhead speakers. In Red we trust. The Red way is the right way. Better red than dead. Gone were the speakers themselves. Gone from street corners were the gourmet kebab carts and crystal smugglers hawking contraband. Gone were most of the pawn shops and moneylenders. Think of mother and father. Mother and father. Have I really found you alone? Asked a voice behind her. Without faithful Molly attached at your hip? It was Dodge. He stepped up beside her. Alice smiled. I made her take the rest of the night off. Nice view. She hadn't noticed. She was standing before a window of telescopic glass that looked out over the lights of the capital city. Yes, it was. All I've got for a view is the back of the royal kitchen. The treatment of a palace guardsman these days, I tell you. A joke. He only told jokes when he was feeling awkward. This is the part where he puts his arm around me, pulls me close, and says that no matter how many looking glass mazes I pass through, no matter how many crowns I wear, I'll always be his Alice, the same little girl who used to run through the palace halls with him when we were younger. What good is my imagination if it can't bring happiness to every Wonderlander? She asked, biting her lip to stop herself from adding, myself included. I wouldn't think I'd have to answer that. We're here, aren't we? Red and the cat are not. That's not what I mean. Red's more public works might have been dismantled or renovated into oblivion, but her influence on Wonderland's culture was still noticeable. Red had rewarded the worst in them. Their narrow-mindedness, selfishness, and pessimism had flourished at the expense of kindness, generosity, and goodwill towards others, the fundamental principles of white imagination. The fundamental principles of white imagination. General Doppelganger insisted on retaining peacekeeping contingents throughout the city, and at least once between every rising of the world's twin suns, a Wonderlander would approach one of these to report a parent or neighbor for treason. Arch was right about one thing. Never mind contending with forces outside one's borders, there will always be enough trouble dealing with disruptive elements from within. It's just, peace really isn't so peaceful, Alice sighed. Whether Dodge was annoyed by her conversation or the plea for sympathy in her tone, she didn't know. He changed the subject. How's Molly working out? Fine. He twisted his features into a doubtful expression. What? She's better than fine. Great, really. We all know how skilled and courageous. It's not her skills and courage I'm worried about, he said. It's her maturity. Alice almost laughed. Here she was, 20 years old, having passed through the looking-glass maze and defeated her evil aunt so as to govern the queendom in the name of white imagination, yet she hardly felt more mature than when she used to play harmless pranks on Bidwit, turning his food into a plate of wormies or imagining a thick bushel of hair on his powdered head. Sure, she was more powerful than she used to be. Her strength came easily and she could feel it in tingling every nerve. But maturity? What was that? It gives Molly confidence to hold the position, she said. Besides, I know what it's like to exist in two worlds as a Haffer does, being neither wholly one thing nor another. And most of the time, I like to have her around. Dodge bowed. Then I must trust Molly to keep the most beautiful of queens safe. Alice looked at him. He'd never been so direct with his affections before. You think I'm beautiful? So, he joked. I know of this other queen a few nations over. She slapped him playfully on the arm. Tell him you love him. That his being the son of a palace guardsman doesn't matter if he still loves you as you hope. But when Alice found her voice, she was surprised at what came out. Do you think Hatter might have gone to Earth? The moment for confessions of the heart had passed. Wonderland's queen and the leader of her palace guard stared out over Wondertropolis, their feelings for each other too big for utterance, neither of them knowing that wherever Hatter had gone, they would need him soon. Chapter 6. Borderland, where women could be given away by their husbands to pay tips, and young, rowdy galleons from Wonderland, fresh from the rigors of formal education, came to indulge themselves in roving pleasure tents, where maps were useless because the nation consisted wholly of nomadic camps, settlements, towns, and cities, and a visitor might find the country's capital, Borderton, situated in the cool shadows of the glyph cliffs, one day, but spread out along Fortune Bay the next. King Arch's domain was a sprawling place with large tracts of unpopulated land to traverse between nomadic settlements. Often, it happened that after an evening of revelry, a visiting Wonderlander would fall into a heavy wine-induced sleep and fail to be roused by the packing up of tents and equipages, the folding up of street signs and storefront displays, the snorting of laden spirit dames. When he woke, he'd find himself alone and unsheltered in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes the tents of the settlement in which he'd caroused the previous night would be visible on the horizon, but no matter how quickly he traveled toward them, they would remain forever on the horizon, an oasis. For further borderland companionship, he could only hope that another settlement would cross his path in its ceaseless wandering. It was a tribal land, and except for clashes, every tribe kept to itself, self-contained and, as King Arch would inform certain of his guests, to a small extent, self-governing. I let them do what they wish in trivial matters such as healing rituals and marriage ceremonies, he would explain. I even let them choose their own leaders, but only so long as they acknowledge me as their king, and only so long as they abide by my edicts in several other important matters. To prevent the Astrakans, R, and other borderland tribes from forgetting these edicts, Arch had them carved, blasted, scorched, chiseled, and branded into the landscape. Carved in a great slab of rock alongside the Buki River, borderland men do not cry when watching sentimental crystal vision programs with their wives. Borderland men do not watch sentimental crystal vision programs with their wives. Blasted into the otherwise smooth face of a glyph cliff, borderland men can take as many wives as they're pleased to enjoy, being more intelligent than women of every nation, country, world, and universe, known or unknown. Chiseled into the jetty in Fortune Bay, borderland men do not talk about their feelings. Borderland men do not whine or complain. Borderland men never show weakness or vulnerability, nor admit to having either. Branded on sun-bleached rocks amid the undulant sands of Dunraria, borderland men are fixed in their convictions from which no feminine argument can sway them. If a borderland man changes his convictions, he does so at his whim, not by the consideration of a wife's views. With row after row of military tent barracks, open-air markets and restaurants, promenades of dry goods stalls, avenues of housing for intel ministers and other officials, countless servant canopies, and its own pleasure tent district, Archer's royal entourage was a city unto itself. His palace, always positioned at the center of his encampment, consisted of 15 interconnected pastel-colored tents whose billowy walls were made of materials more plush and smooth than any velvet, silk, or velour found on earth. Having snaked its way across the wind-sculpted dunes of Dunraria toward the Buki River, then toward the swampy woods of Chance, Archer's convoy had made camp within sight of Rolling Double's Mound, and if not for the edict he'd ordered scorched into the side of the mountain in letters twice his own height, and which was visible to him now, borderland men eat their food with passion and with an urgency that signifies their virility. Arch would have doubted that one of his present guests was a man. Delicious, Jack of Diamonds said through a mouthful of crunchy griffin wing. Griffin wing? The way it's spelled, Gryphon. I don't know. We'll say Griffin. Just because. Okay, delicious, Jack of Diamonds said through a mouthful of crunchy griffin wing. Freshly bathed and dressed, emitting a scent too flowery to be called manly, the scion of the Diamond Clan sat between his parents, shoveling food into his mouth with the eagerness of two men. A servant girl entered carrying a platter of conical-shaped treats with what looked like tiny antennas poking out of them, their pointed ends charred. Try a dormouse snout, Arch offered. I think you'll find them equal to any delicacy you've ever tasted. Jack bit into one. More than equal. My chef will be so pleased, Arch said, a hint of disdain in his voice. He turned his attention to the Lord of Diamonds. Do you think I'm lacking in intelligence, Lord Diamond? Or that I don't know enough about manipulating people to get what I want? By no means, my liege, but at this moment, a gang of warriors from the Anu tribe are being entertained in one of my pleasure tents. By the time they leave this encampment, I'll have them fully convinced that the Maljoys, with whom they have an unstable peace, are planning to attack them. I fail to see how I can lack the intelligence necessary to my position and yet be clever enough to maintain my dominance over all borderland tribes by keeping them fighting one another. Because as long as they're fighting one another, Jack interrupted, popping a dormouse snout into his mouth, they can't band together to defeat you. Arch leaned menacingly toward the Lord of Diamonds. Stop insulting my intelligence with your excuses, my lord. Your son has returned to you. I have fulfilled my half of our agreement. It's time you fulfilled yours. Yes, there's a maid of Queen Alice's who I believe is ripe for manipulation. Possibly. King Arch smirked at his bodyguards, Ripkins and Blister, who were standing off to one side. A maid, eh? And you believe she might possibly be right? What helpful information? I almost prefer your excuses. We could better identify a target for you, Your Majesty, if we knew what you wanted the person for, said the Lady of Diamonds. Arch looked curiously at this upstart woman, who sat fidgeting in increasingly uncomfortable silence until the king at length addressed her husband. Expecting your inability, I myself made a reconnaissance mission to Wonderland and have found my quarry, Queen Alice's bodyguard, Humbug Molly. But Molly is devoted to Alice, said the Lord of Diamonds. Her desire to prove her devotion and worth is what I will depend on. Alice spent a great deal of her strength and resources against Red. The more time that passes, the stronger she will become. Therefore, I have decided, very selflessly and courageously, that to ensure a proper future for our world, I must take control of Wonderland as soon as possible. And the Heart Crystal. The Heart Crystal. It was no secret that the Lady of Diamonds, as well as Wonderland's other ladies of foremost rank, the Lady of Clubs and the Lady of Spades, wanted to possess the crystal, each believing herself more gifted in imagination than she truly was. Well, I don't claim to gain any strength of body or mind from the crystal, Arch explained. Its influence over Earth will prove helpful in my charitable endeavors. It's a burden to care for others more than they care for themselves, but, as my intel ministers have informed me, the only way I can prevent Earth from devolving into utter ruination is to take control of it, too. Jack had by now finished off the platters of griffin wing and dormouse snout, and was indulging in a heap of sliced dingy pear to cleanse his palate. Anyone watching him would have thought him too intent on filling his belly to pay attention to the conversation going on around him. But Jack was a talented listener, ever sifting through what he heard for information that, at some time or other, in some way, he might exploit to his own advantage. Swallowing down the last of the dingy pear, he eyed Blister. Was this the fellow who'd freed him from the crystal mines? You there, he said. Instead of standing around being useless, how about you fill my glass with wine? Blister's expression revealed nothing. Certainly. The bodyguard made his slow, deliberate way to Jack, reached out to put his hand over Jack's with the apparent intention of helping to steady the glass as he poured. But, leave him, Blister, to Jack, Arch said. Believe me, you don't want his help. He snapped his fingers, and a servant girl hurried in on silent feet to fill Jack's glass. I have already unleashed several regiments of fighters that Alice and her people should find familiar. It's merely a diversionary tactic, a ploy to focus their military attentions off into the distance so that the bulk of my forces can enter relatively unopposed into Rundetropolis itself. I can forgive your failure, Lord Diamond, only if you do something else for me. Ripkins stepped forward and set an exquisitely carved chest the size of a bread loaf before the Lord of Diamonds. I want you to present this little item to Hamburg Molly. It's beautiful, whispered the Lady of Diamonds. Its exterior is nothing compared to what it contains. It's a small prototype of a weapon I'm developing, a fraction of the strength of what it will ultimately be, but enough to serve my present purposes. Though I warn you all, if you value your lives, only in so much as they give us power, wealth, and influence, Jack declared. If you value them for any reason, you will not open that chest. You will leave that privilege to Hamburg Molly. Arch leaned back in his chair, letting himself relax, the end of this pertinent business near. Tell me, Lord Diamond, what do you think of kings? I think they make the best sovereigns, much better than queens. Arch laughed. You're wiser than you look. As a reward for your wisdom, and assuming you don't prove inept at delivering my weapon into Hamburg Molly's girlish hands once Wonderland is in my care, I intend to grant you back your ancestral lands to govern as you please. The diamond hectareate? The king nodded. The borders of which will be exactly as they used to be before your ancestors and those of the club Spade and Heart clans formed the coalition that eventually became Wonderland. Who knows? Perhaps I'll even throw in a bit of the club's former hectareate for you to govern. Well, well, that was something the Diamonds hadn't expected. The hectareate, theirs again. They could always scheme to get control of the heart crystal later. Bloated with family pride, Jack emptied onto the table a pocketful of the rhyolite crystals he'd flinched from the mines. Is there a wig merchant in this settlement you can recommend, Arch? In Borderland, men do not wear wigs, said the king, thinking he'd have this carved somewhere on his nation's landscape at the next opportunity. Now listen well, all of you. Here's my plan. After the Diamonds had been escorted out of the tent, Arch dismissed everyone save Ripkins and Blisters. You know what you're to do. The bodyguards nodded. She'll be unconscious from that blast, but she shouldn't be too injured. Do not make her more so. Their disappointment was obvious. They who usually held themselves so taut had slackened somehow. Sent the Seekers with this. Arch handed Ripkins the button that had dropped off Molly's coat during his interview with Alice. You should have no trouble once the Crystal Continuum is out of commission, as Wonderland's military will be too preoccupied. Remember, Alice and her forces do not know that I'm the aggressor, so don't let yourselves be seen. But as I won't begrudge you having some fun on your outing, should anybody see you, you're not to let them live. The bodyguards shrugged off their disappointment. Their usual spirits returned. Blister, thanks you, said Blister. Blister thanks you, said Blister. Ripkins too, said Ripkins. Showing proper deference to their king, these rivals to Hadamadigan's military prowess took their leave, and before Arch had retired for the night, they crossed the border into Alice's realm with nowhere near the cunning they might have, hoping to be seen by as many Wonderlanders as possible. Oh my gosh. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 6. I want to thank y'all for joining me for another episode of Toyzilla's Book Club. Again, we'll be continuing Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We always start our video game sessions, and around 9:30, 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, we will be doing our book clubs as usual. So I thank y'all for joining me, and Toyzilla is ending this session. All right, now, if you like what you see, you turn on your PC and viewed it. Bye now. Toyzilla is out.